Let's get more on the modern-day race to the stars with Dean Cheng, Senior Research Fellow at the Asian Studies Centers at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now from Washington, D.C. Dean, great to see you, and thank you for your time. First of all, starting with China, late Chairman Mao said China couldn't even launch a potato into space. Where is China in the space race, and what exactly does it want to achieve strategically?
Well, I think it's very important first to say that I'm not sure there is a space race. When we think space race, what do we think about? We're thinking about the 1950s and 1960s when people were launching rockets left and right, and we were launching manned missions about every other month. What the Chinese are doing, however, is a very steady program of step-by-step developing their satellite systems, developing a lunar exploration program, developing a manned space program. And at this point, China is arguably ahead of Europe, which cannot put its own people into space. The U.S. is only just recently, thanks to Elon Musk, able to launch astronauts into space with its own rockets. So China definitely is one of the big three in manned aerospace, the United States, Russia, and China. And it fields a complete set of constellations for weather, for communications, for geodesy. So it is probably the closest challenger alongside Russia to the United States.
Can China do this on its own? Does it need to collaborate and cooperate internationally? And how challenging is that to do that, particularly with NASA and the US, given their long-standing rivalry?
Well, China's space scientists are rightfully very proud because the vast bulk of what they have done in space has been indigenous. The Chinese rockets that they're using, the Long March series, the Chang'e, the various lunar landers, the Shenzhou manned spacecraft, all of these are built in China by companies that pretty much rely on their own technology. China does not cooperate with the United States, partly because of the Wolf Amendment, which prohibits NASA from doing so, but also because, frankly, China is an unclear partner given issues of intellectual property, given respect for IP, and more broadly speaking, China wants to set its own course. They did cooperate with the Russians to try and put a probe, for example, into Martian orbit, but the Russian rocket for Phobos Grunt failed. And that, if you're a Chinese scientist, you're going to look at that and say, why do I want to cooperate with other people?
There's nothing like a little bit of rivalry to get things fired up, right? And to what extent do you feel that maybe this successful trip to the moon by China is going to fire up the US efforts for the moon as well for the incoming Biden administration?
Well, I think the Trump administration has been very clear that it is very focused on space. They've issued a series of space policy directives that have really altered the landscape of the American space effort. The creation of Space Force, much heavier dependence on commercial vendors and the like. I think that symbolically speaking, the fact that the Chang'e 5 mission went to the moon and now has successfully returned, occurring the same week that the Arecibo radio telescope collapsed in Puerto Rico, really is a political symbol of both China's up-and-coming aspect and some of the problems in the American effort. One of the great problems with presidential transitions is that every president seems to feel like they need to do space differently. One can only hope that Mr. Biden, having spent a lot of time as vice president and senator, will build on the successes that we have already seen and push forward the goal of putting Americans back on the moon by 2024.
It's a very expensive operation, though, isn't it? Putting people on the moon, putting people out into space. I mean, you shouldn't be doing it just because of rivalry. So what do you think, Dean, needs to be the end goal for space exploration, whether it's China, Russia, US, or another country? What should be the end goal for the human race?
Well, I think a variety of people far smarter than I have laid out a lot of goals. People like Stephen Hawking, as well as Elon Musk, have said, you know, it's kind of risky that humanity has put all of its eggs on one basket. If anything were to happen to Earth, we'd all be in trouble. The Chinese, when they began to push their manned space program back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a very senior Chinese general said, we have to inspire Chinese people to become aerospace engineers. And the only way to do that is to give them something to look to be proud of. And I think that both the lunar lander and the manned missions fulfills that objective. And then, of course, there is the reality that we are a questing species. We want to learn more about what's out there, and there is no more bigger out there than outer space. What is on Mars? What is on the moons of Jupiter? What lies beyond the Oort cloud? These are questions that I'd like to think fire up the human imagination.
To infinity and beyond, to quote someone very famous. Thank you so much for joining us. Dean Cheng from the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating.